Don't crowd those pilots, Corinne. They've got a job to do, and it isn't babysitting you. My father said it loud enough that the couple ahead of us at gate B14 turned around to look. He said it the way he says most things, like he was doing me a favor, like he was the only adult in a room full of children who hadn't figured out how the world worked yet. I stood there on that gray carpet with the smell of burnt airport coffee in my nose, holding a small black roller bag, and for a second I felt 11 years old again. Not 34, 11. My name is Corinne Ellison, and I spent the better part of 2 decades trying to make my father proud of me. Not impressed. Impressed is easy. You can impress a stranger with a nice watch. I wanted him proud, which is a different and more expensive thing. And it turns out you can spend your whole life trying to buy it from someone who was never selling. My father was a man who believed in the surface of things. He believed a firm handshake told you everything, that a person's worth could be read off the label of their coat, that the people who mattered were the ones whose names other people already knew. He collected connections, the way some men collect old coins. He could tell you which of our neighbors had a boat, which of his coworkers had a cousin who once played minor league ball, which restaurant had a chef who used to cook for somebody important. And when it came to me, his own daughter, the woman he raised, he had exactly one sentence he liked to use. Corinne works for the airline. That was it. That was the whole story of my life, boiled down to 5 words a person could say at a barbecue and then move on from. He wasn't there at the gate that day because he knew what I did. He was there because I was flying him and my mother out to Denver for my parents' 40th anticipated anniversary trip, and because he had decided, somewhere in his head, that being flown somewhere by his daughter's employer was a nice perk of having a daughter who worked for the airline. He thought I'd gotten them some kind of discount. He thought that was the extent of it. He had no idea. And in about 40 minutes, standing on that jet bridge with the whole gate area watching, he was going to find out exactly who the people at that aircraft door had been waiting for. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up, because the part that matters isn't the reveal. The part that matters is all the years before it, the ones nobody claps for. I grew up in a split-level house outside of Akron with a driveway my father repaved himself and was inordinately proud of. My mother taught 4th grade for 31 years. My older brother was the son the whole house rotated around, and I say that without much bitterness now, though it took me a long time to get here. He was 2 years older, tall, easy, the kind of kid teachers liked and other parents wanted their kids to be friends with. When he made varsity, my father drove 3 hours to away games. When he got into the state school on a partial scholarship, my father had the acceptance letter framed. I'm not making that up. He framed it and hung it in the hallway by the thermostat, where everyone who came over had to walk past it. I got good grades too. I got better grades, honestly. But my father had a way of turning my achievements into weather. Like they just happened, like they blew in on their own and had nothing to do with me sitting at the kitchen table until midnight. My brother's B was a triumph he'd earned. My A was just the way things were, the temperature outside, nothing to comment on. I noticed it early, the way kids notice everything and understand nothing. I didn't have a word for it yet. I just knew that when I brought something home, the air in the room stayed the same. The thing I loved from the time I was maybe 9 was airplanes. It started dumb, the way real things usually do. There was a small county airport, about 20 minutes from our house, and my mother, on the days she needed to get me out of the house and out of my own head, used to drive me out there and park at the end of the access road, where you could watch the little planes take off. Cessnas, mostly, a couple of old crop dusters. We'd sit on the hood with a bag of pretzels and she'd let me count them. I don't know why it grabbed me. Something about a heavy machine agreeing to leave the ground. Something about how quiet the men who flew them seemed, how unhurried, how they walked around the airplane touching things before they got in, checking, being sure. I wanted to be the kind of person who was sure like that. I told my father once, I think I was 12, that I wanted to be a pilot. He laughed. Not a cruel laugh, he'd tell you, and maybe it wasn't, but a laugh is a laugh when you're 12. You get carsick on the way to church, he said. And that was the end of the conversation, as far as he was concerned. My mother, though, waited until we were in the car the next morning and she said quietly, not looking at me, "You'd be good at that." 4 words. I have carried those 4 words for 22 years. They weighed more than everything my father ever said to me put together. Here's what people who've never done it don't understand about becoming a pilot. It is not glamorous, and it is not fast, and for a long stretch of it, it is genuinely humiliating. I didn't have money. My parents weren't going to pay for flight training, partly because it's expensive, and partly because my father still thought it was a phase, a girl's idea of a fun job, something I'd grow out of once I found something more sensible, or found a husband, whichever came first. So I did it the hard way. I worked at a call center in college and put money aside. I got my private license first, an hour at a time, whenever I could afford another hour, which sometimes meant not flying for 2 months while I saved up. I fueled airplanes at the same little county field where my mother used to park at the end of the runway. I mopped the floor of the flight school in exchange for ground time. I racked up debt I didn't tell anyone about, $30-some thousand of it eventually. Because that's what building enough flight hours costs when nobody's writing you a check. I flew night freight for 2 years in a beat-up twin that leaked heat, hauling canceled checks and auto parts between small cities in the dark, while everyone I knew was asleep. $38,000 a year, flying single pilot into airports with no tower and iced-over runways, learning to be calm when the calm did not come naturally, learning to be sure. I got furloughed once when a regional carrier went under, and I spent 4 months bartending, and my father, when he heard, said, "Well, maybe now you'll think about a real job." A real job. I had been trusted, at that point, to move an aircraft through weather at night, with people's overnight mail and my own life on board, and to him it wasn't real, because he'd never heard of the company. My mother knew what it cost me. She was the one I called at 2 a.m. From a comfort inn in Bismarck when I wasn't sure I could keep doing it. She never once told me to quit. She'd just say, "Get some sleep. You'll feel different in the daylight." And she was usually right. My father noticed outcomes. He saw the eventual uniform later, and thought a uniform was a thing you were handed. My mother saw the process, the 10 years of it, the parts that happened at 3 in the morning, where nobody was around to be impressed. There's a difference between the person who claps at the finish line, and the person who was standing at every mile marker in the rain. I know which one I'd want. It took my father a long time to figure out which one he'd been. The jobs got better slowly. Regional first officer. Then, after enough time and enough hours, a call from a major carrier, the kind of name my father would actually recognize, which mattered to him even though it shouldn't have. First officer again, starting over at the bottom of another seniority list because that's how it works. And then, 4 years ago, after all of it, I upgraded. I made captain. 4 stripes. My own aircraft, my own crew, the left seat, the final word. The day I passed the check ride, I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried for 20 minutes, and then I called my mother, and she cried too, and then she said, "Have you told your father?" And I said no. And she was quiet for a second and said, "Tell him however feels right to you, honey." I did tell him. I called him that night. And do you know what he said? "That's nice. Hey, did I tell you your brother's getting a promotion? Regional sales manager now. Whole territory." And he was off, talking about my brother's company car. And I sat there on my end of the phone with 4 brand new stripes on a shirt in my closet, and I realized something that I think I'd been refusing to realize for about 30 years. He was never going to see it. Not because he couldn't. Because seeing it would have meant admitting that the thing he'd laughed at when I was 12 had become bigger than anything he'd ever done, and something in him could not hold that. So he changed the subject. He always changed the subject. My mother, in the background I found out later, was making him get off the phone so she could call me back and tell me she was proud of me, which she did for 40 minutes and never once changed the subject. So that's the shape of it. That's the family. Now let me tell you about the airport. It was the fall, the week of my parents' anniversary, and I'd offered months earlier to fly them out to Denver, where my mother had always wanted to see the mountains in person, and never had, because my father is not a vacation kind of man. He agreed to it, the way he agreed to most things involving me, with a kind of managed patience, like he was letting me contribute. What he heard when I said, "I'll get you out there," was that his daughter, who worked for the airline, could rustle up a couple of cheap seats. What was actually happening, though I did not tell him, was that I had bid for and been assigned that specific route that week, and I was going to be flying the aircraft they were on. I didn't tell him, because part of me, the tired part, wanted to see his face. And part of me, the part I'm less proud of, was still 11 years old and still wanted him to be proud. And I thought maybe this would finally be the thing. We met at the airport that morning. My father wore his good sport coat, the navy one, and he'd shined his shoes, because to him going to the airport was still an occasion. Still 1985, still a thing you dressed up for. My mother wore the cream-colored blouse she saves for church, and looked nervous and happy in the way she gets when she's about to do something new. I was in plain clothes, jeans and a fleece, my captain's shirt and jacket and hat zipped inside a garment bag over my shoulder, because I was going to change in the crew room after I got them settled. That was the plan. Get them to the gate, hug them, disappear, and then walk out onto the jet bridge in uniform and let the moment land on its own. It didn't go according to plan, because my father never lets anything just be quiet. We got through security, which took a while because my father does not believe in taking his belt off and argues with the TSA agent about it every single time as if the rules are a personal insult. And we made our way to B14. It's a long walk out to the B concourse in that terminal, and my father narrated the whole thing. He pointed out the flight status boards like he'd invented them. He told my mother which airlines were the good ones, a ranking based on nothing. And when we got to the gate and I saw the aircraft sitting there through the big windows, my aircraft, the one I'd be taking to Denver, something in my chest went warm and steady, the way it always does when I see the airplane I'm about to fly. That feeling never gets old. 10 years of night freight and furloughs and it still doesn't get old. The gate was busy. The crew was already down at the aircraft doing their pre-flight, and the agents were setting up for boarding, and there was that low hum of 160 people, all quietly hoping their group gets called soon. My father, of course, found the most important-looking person in the vicinity to talk at, which happened to be a man in an expensive suit standing near the priority lane, and started telling him, unprompted, that his daughter works for the airline, so we know how these things go. The man in the suit smiled the way you smile at a stranger's father. My mother touched my arm and gave me a small, tired look, an old look, one we've exchanged 1,000 times, the one that says I know, honey, I know. And then I made my mistake. I said, I'm going to go check in up front. I'll be right back. And I started toward the jet bridge door, where a gate agent was standing with her scanner, because I needed to get down to the aircraft and get into uniform before boarding started. My father moved faster than I've seen him move in years. Corinne, he stepped in front of me. Where do you think you're going? Up to the aircraft, Dad. I need to. You can't go down there. That's for crew. He said crew like it was a members-only club, and I'd wandered up to the velvet rope. Sit down. They'll call your group like everybody else. I swear, you've always got to be the exception. People were looking now, a few of them. The couple ahead of us in line, an older woman with a neck pillow, a kid of about 9 who'd stopped watching his tablet. My father has a caring voice and no idea that he has one. Dad, it's fine, I just need to, don't crowd those pilots. And there it was, the sentence I opened with, the one that turned heads at gate B14. They've got a job to do, and it isn't babysitting you. You can't just march down there because you feel like it. That's not how it works. You want to embarrass yourself in front of these people? And here's the thing I want you to understand, because it's the whole thing really. He wasn't being cruel in his mind. In his mind, he was protecting me. He genuinely believed I was about to make a fool of myself, that I was about to walk up to a professional and get politely turned away in front of a crowd, and that as my father, it was his job to stop that before it happened. He'd been stopping me my whole life. From the pilot dream at 12, from flight school, from the unreal jobs. Every time he called it protecting me. And every single time, what it actually did was make me smaller, keep me in the seat, keep me in group 4. Keep me the daughter who works for the airline and not the woman who was about to fly the airplane. I didn't argue with him. I want to be honest about that, because it wasn't strength, exactly, in that moment. It was just that I was so tired, 22 years tired. I'd learned somewhere along the way that with my father, explaining never worked. Explaining just gave him more to argue with. So I stood there. I let him say his piece. My mother had gone very still beside him, and I could see she'd caught something in the air that he hadn't, because mothers always do. The gate agent at the jet bridge door was watching this. She was young, maybe 25, and she'd clearly clocked the whole exchange, and I watched her look at my face, and then at the garment bag over my shoulder, and I saw her put it together. She keyed her radio quietly and said something into it I couldn't hear. Sir, she said, stepping toward us. It's all right, she can come down. My father turned on her, delighted to have found someone new to instruct. No, you don't understand. She works for the airline. She thinks that means she can just, sir. The agent's voice was polite and completely immovable. The voice of someone who deals with men like my father 40 times a shift. She needs to come down to the aircraft. We can't leave without her. My father laughed, that same laugh from when I was 12. The one that says, you sweet, confused child. Can't leave without her. Come on. It's one passenger. And that's when the jet bridge door opened from the other side, and my first officer stuck his head out. He's a good guy, flew Blackhawks in the Army, has about zero patience for nonsense and a great deal of warmth for the people he respects. He'd been down at the aircraft finishing the walk-around, and he'd heard the radio call, and he came up the bridge looking for me. He saw me standing there in my fleece with my dad blocking my path, and he did the last thing on earth my father was expecting. He came to a stop, straightened up just slightly, and said, "There you are, Captain. We're ready for you whenever you are. Weather's clean all the way to Denver, Captain." I have replayed the next 4 seconds more times than I can count, and I still don't have adequate words for what happened to my father's face. It didn't crumple. It didn't fall. It just stopped. Everything in it stopped, like a machine that had been running my whole life, had suddenly been unplugged, and the fan was still spinning down. His mouth was open, mid-word, still halfway into whatever he'd been about to say to the first officer, and the word never came out. He looked at the first officer. He looked at the garment bag on my shoulder, and I watched him finally see the shape of it, the shape of a uniform. And then he looked at me, and I saw him do the math, the whole thing, 22 years of it, all at once, and come out the other side with an answer he did not know what to do with. My mother made a small sound. When I turned to her, she had her hand over her mouth, and her eyes were shining, and she was nodding, just barely, at me, and she wasn't surprised, not really. She'd known the whole time what her daughter did for a living. She was just watching the moment she'd waited 22 years for arrive at last, and it had arrived exactly the way it should have, without me having to say a single word in my own defense. "Give me 2 minutes to change," I said to my first officer, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. He nodded, said, "Take your time, Captain," and headed back down the bridge. The gate area had gone quiet in that particular way a crowd goes quiet when something real has happened in front of it. The kid with the tablet was staring at me with his mouth open. The woman with the neck pillow was smiling. The man in the expensive suit, the one my father had been lecturing about how these things go, was looking at my father with an expression I can only describe as gentle pity. And my father saw it, and I think that was almost the worst part for him. Not that I was the captain, that the important stranger had seen him be wrong about his own daughter. I did not gloat. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this kind of story is supposed to go, and that's not how it went, and it's not who I am. I didn't have some cutting line ready. I didn't need one. I'd stopped needing one a long time ago, and just hadn't fully believed it until that second. I looked at my father, and he was still standing there unplugged, and instead of triumph, what I mostly felt was a strange and sudden sadness, because I understood that he had spent my entire life so busy deciding where I didn't belong that he'd missed the whole long story of where I'd actually gone. All those years he could have been proud, and he'd spent them changing the subject. "I've got to get to work, Dad," I said quietly, so only he and my mother could hear. "You two are in first class. I put you there. Somebody'll take good care of you." And I hugged my mother, who held on a beat longer than usual and whispered, "I always knew," into my ear, and I squeezed my father's shoulder once, because he's my father and I'm not made of stone, and I walked down the jet bridge to fly my parents to Denver. I want to tell you the flight fixed everything, but that's not how people work, and I've never had much use for stories that pretend otherwise. What actually happened is that I flew a very ordinary, very smooth flight. Light chop over Kansas, otherwise clean, just like the first officer promised. About an hour in, I did the thing captains sometimes do, and I came on the PA. I didn't say anything about my family. I just did the normal captain thing, pointed out that we were passing over the Arkansas River, told them what the weather looked like in Denver, thanked them for flying with us. But I knew, the whole time I was talking, that 2 people in seats 2A and 2C were hearing my voice come out of the speaker above their heads, and that for one of them it was the first time in her life she got to sit in a first-class seat and listen to her daughter be, without argument, unmistakably, the person in charge of the airplane. My mother told me later she cried quietly, looking out the window at the country going by underneath, and my father sat next to her and didn't say a word for the whole 2.5 hours. We didn't talk much on that trip. It was awkward, honestly. He didn't know how to be around me now, that the frame he'd kept me in for 34 years had come off the wall. A couple of times I caught him looking at me like he was seeing a stranger, and in a way he was. The mountains were beautiful. My mother cried again, seeing them for the first time, happy tears, and my father held her hand, and I took a picture of the 2 of them with the Rockies behind them, that I still have on my phone. He was polite to me the whole trip in a careful, uncertain way that was almost harder to take than the old dismissiveness. At least the dismissiveness was familiar. It was about 3 months later that he called and asked if we could talk. Just us. That in itself was new. My father did not initiate conversations that might be difficult. We met at a diner halfway between our places, one of those American diners with the laminated menus a foot tall and coffee that never stops coming, and he was already in the booth when I got there, and he'd ordered me a coffee the way I take it, which he'd apparently been paying attention to at some point over the years without my knowing. He was different. That's the only way I can put it. The man who always had the answers sat across from me with his hands around his coffee mug and didn't have one, and for once he wasn't pretending to. He said he'd been thinking about the airport for 3 months. He said he kept seeing it, the first officer calling me captain, the look on the important man's face, my mother with her hand over her mouth. He said, and this cost him something to say, I didn't know. I mean, I knew you flew. I didn't know you were the one flying it. And then quieter, I've been telling people the wrong thing for years. I could have made it easy for him. I've thought a lot about why I didn't. I think it's because if I'd let him off with a nice father-daughter reconciliation over pie, we'd have gone right back to where we were, and I was done going back there. So I let it be quiet for a minute, and then I asked him the question I'd been carrying since I was 12 years old, standing in a kitchen while he laughed. Dad, why did protecting me always mean keeping me small? He didn't answer right away. The waitress came and topped off the coffee neither of us was drinking and left again. And my father looked down at the table, and then he said something I did not expect, something I think he'd never said out loud to anyone. Because you scared me, he said. You always scared me. You wanted things I didn't understand, and you were going to go get them whether I helped you or not, and I didn't know how to be your father if you didn't need me to show you the way. He turned his coffee mug a quarter turn on the table. Your brother needed me. It felt good. Being needed. You never needed me. You needed me to get out of the way. And I couldn't tell the difference between getting out of your way and losing you, so I kept standing in front of you. And I called it protecting you. He looked up. I'm sorry. It's about 30 years too late, and I know that. But I'm sorry. I'm not going to pretend that fixed everything either, because it didn't, and anybody who's tried to repair something with a parent knows one diner conversation doesn't undo 3 decades. But it was the first time in my life my father stopped defending himself and started listening, and that turned out to be the thing that mattered. Not the apology even. The listening. He asked me questions that day, real ones. He asked what it was actually like, flying freight at night in the winter. He asked how you learned to stay calm. He asked, and this one got me, whether I'd been scared, all those years, doing it alone. And when I said yes, sometimes terrified, he nodded like a man taking in true information for the first time, instead of a man waiting for his turn to talk. Here's what I've come to, after all of it. For a long time I thought that if I just achieved enough, if I stacked up enough certificates and stripes and check rides, I'd finally reach the number that would make my father proud. That pride was a total I could hit if I just kept adding. And the hard, freeing thing I learned standing on that jet bridge at gate B14 is that his approval was never the prize. It couldn't be. Because I had already become the person I set out to become somewhere back in the dark over Bismarck, alone, at 3 in the morning, with no one watching and no one to impress. The uniform didn't make me a captain. The moment the first officer said the word out loud didn't make me a captain. I was already one, and had been for years, in every hour nobody clapped for. All the airport did was let the rest of the world catch up to a fact that was already true. My father comes to see me now when I have a layover near him. He asks about the flying. Last month he told a man at his hardware store, apropos of nothing, according to my mother who was there, my daughter's a captain, flies the big ones, Denver, Seattle, all over. She said he stood a little straighter saying it. And I'd be lying if I said that didn't land somewhere soft in me, the 11-year-old part that never fully goes away. But the difference now, the whole difference, is that I don't need him to say it anymore. It's nice. It's not necessary. Those are 2 very different things, and it took me most of my life to learn to tell them apart. If you're out there and someone who loves you keeps telling you to stay away from the very thing you've earned, keeps calling it protection while it quietly makes you smaller, I hope you do what I finally learned to do. I hope you set down the weight of waiting for them to see it. And I hope, when your moment comes and somebody finally says your name and your title out loud in a crowded room, you already know it's true because you were there for every mile in the rain, and you never actually needed anyone's permission to walk toward the thing that was always yours.